It is March 15th, 2023, and there's some severe weather in the United States right now. Another one of those atmospheric rivers is pounding the west coast, while powerful nor'easter pounds the east. That really shouldn't surprise us. Severe weather often occurs in March in the United States. In fact, some of the worst blizzards in U.S. history occurred in March, including the 1888 Great Blizzard and the 1993 Storm of the Century. And another one of those terrible March blizzards, fast-moving Alberta Clipper that struck the northern plains, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Saskatchewan on March 15, 1941, moved so quickly that it stranded thousands of people and killed more than 100. The 1941 Ides of March blizzard deserves to be remembered.
The storm struck with little warning, United Academics magazine wrote in 2017. The weather forecast predicted snow precipitation and low temperatures for that night, but there were no mentions of an aggravation of the climate conditions, let alone a blizzard warning. In fact, it was a surprisingly pleasant day for the northern plains in March, drawing people out. United Academics continues. The region awoke with a little taste of the springtime that was about to come. The day was cold but shiny, and the snow was melting. For North Dakota residents, it looked like the perfect day to be out of their houses and forget the chill winter and the bombs blowing up all over Europe. In 2018, the Dickinson, North Dakota Press quoted a story about the blizzard told to Connie Kirpus Hannison of Crookston, Minnesota, by her father Edward. March 15th dawned a beautiful warm day, hinting at the approach of spring. Following a long, hard winter that had begun with the Armistice Day blizzard, many had cabin fever and took advantage of the sunshiny day to be out and about. Little did anyone know that the worst blizzard of the century was only hours away. The Hope, North Dakota Pioneer wrote on March 20th, 1941, that quite a number of farmers were caught in town. Some had come to shop, others to attend a show. So when the storm struck, people were simply unprepared. The Pioneer continued, striking with sudden fury and continuing for hours. The worst storm in years visited the section of the country Saturday night, bringing death and destruction. The storm struck Hope about 8 in the evening. Following a pleasant day that no indication that a storm was brewing, some warning had been given over the radio that a strong wind was coming, but not many people paid any serious attention to it, as wind is not an uncommon thing in North Dakota. Meteorologist Daryl Richardson told the Dickinson Press, because it was a warm day, people were not dressed for a winter storm. But when the storm came, it came fast. A personal blog called St. Vincent, Minnesota Memories writes, at 7:24 p.m. on Saturday, March 15th, the wind in Pembina, North Dakota, was at 36 miles per hour. But 10 minutes later, it jumped to 58 miles per hour. Pembina immediately warned the Fargo Airport station of the drastic change. This was the first report Fargo had received that a dangerous storm had arrived in northeastern North Dakota. Weather historian Bill Murray wrote in a 2014 edition of the Alabama Weather blog, across North Dakota and Minnesota, temperatures dropped 20 degrees in 15 minutes in many places as Arctic air moved in. The fast-moving storm brought 50-mile-per-hour sustained winds to a wide area, and 85-mile-per-hour wind gusts were recorded in Grand Forks. Whiteout conditions were recorded as what would be known as the Ides of March blizzard raged. The speed of the storm was the result of a specific kind of weather system. Reader's Digest Canada explains. It was a devastating type of snowstorm called an Alberta Clipper, a fast-moving cold front swooping in from the Rockies that brought whiteout conditions and ferocious wind chills of minus 45 degrees Celsius out of nowhere. The website of Farmer's Almanac writes that Alberta Clipper is a name coined to describe a fast-moving storm system that sweeps down across the northern plains and Great Lakes regions of the United States from, you guessed it, Alberta, Canada, or thereabouts, anyway. Alberta Clippers can actually originate from nearby Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or even the state of Montana to the south. And explains that Alberta Clippers are caused by low-pressure systems that form when warm winds from the Pacific Ocean collide with the colder air over the Rocky Mountains. The term clipper is a reference to the speed of these storms. The almanac continues. Because of their speed, Alberta Clippers often swoop in with little warning. The storms take their name from the Clippers, sleek, agile merchant sailing vessels popular during the 19th century and designed for speed. The term is apt, and the weather phenomenon was well demonstrated in the Ides of March blizzard. The website of Prairie Public Radio notes that in western North Dakota, the temperature suddenly dropped from 33 to 70 degrees below zero, and winds picked up to 40 miles per hour. The Dickinson, North Dakota Press wrote that as sudden as the dropping of a curtain, A black fog of churning dust and snow blinded the prairies for 1,000 miles. The wind was the most shocking part of the storm. Connie Kirpus Hannison told the Dickinson Press that her father remembered the winds, estimated to 80 to 85 miles per hour, sounded like a freight train hitting the house. The Regina, Saskatchewan Leader Post told the story of a Northside store manager who went to pick up his wife in the storm. As he went outside, his hat blew off. On his way back, while driving under the Broad Street subway, he saw a hat resting on the road. He stopped and picked it up. It was one that he had lost an hour earlier and blocks away. The Evening Herald wrote that little snow accompanied the terrific wind, but what there was became packed into rock-like drifts in many places. Recorded wind velocity included one of 74 miles an hour at Fargo and another of 68 miles per hour at Grand Forks, both in North Dakota. Sudden gusts at times raised the gale as much as 15 miles per hour. Such sudden winds could be deadly on their own. The Hagerstown, Maryland Daily Mail reported that North Dakota authorities reported that in a number of instances, storm victims were suffocated by the sheer force of the wind, their lungs congested with the snow and dirt-filled air. The suddenness of the storm meant that many were trapped, unable to travel home. The Omaha, Nebraska Evening Herald writes that thousands were forced to spend most of the night in theaters and other amusement places Saturday night because police forbade them to go out in the storm. About 3,000 farmers who went to Moorhead, Minnesota to hear an address by an Agricultural Adjustment Administration administrator were forced to stay there the night. 2,000 spectators attending a basketball tournament at Moorhead State had to stay in the junior high school gymnasium, and competing teams played throughout the night. The Daily Mail reported that theaters, hotels, and stores in the population centers in the storm area remained open all night to accommodate thousands of farmers and their families marooned in towns. Many others were trapped in their cars. The Halleck, Minnesota Kitson County Enterprise reported that all of a sudden the wind switched to the northwest and struck with such a violent fury, and within an instant's time the entire scene was transformed into a raging blizzard as the thermometer started to plunge downward as though it had been plunged into a cake of ice. The fury of the storm was such that persons driving were simply trapped and stopped in their tracks. The Buffalo New York News reported that dozens of cars plunged into ditches driven there by the wind. Others slipped from the road as fine snow and dust, swirled by the gale, cut visibility to nothing. The Winnipeg Tribune wrote that hundreds of automobiles were abandoned Saturday night along highways throughout the stricken area. The Hope Pioneer reported that the Hope Junior High basketball team was trapped by the storm. H.R. Eastman started out with the team and got within 2 or 3 miles of Findlay when the storm struck them. In an effort to reach town, Mr. Eastman had 2 of the boys walk ahead of the car, but little progress was made, and this was abandoned. The team spent the night out in the car. As long as the gas held out, the heater kept them from getting cold. When their feet started to chill, they took their shoes off and sat on each other's feet.
The team was rescued in the morning, but others were not so lucky.
The website of the History Channel writes that most of the victims of the blizzard were traveling in their cars when it hit. Highway 2, running from Duluth, Minnesota to North Dakota, was shut down, as were Highways 75 and 81. Attempts to rescue those stranded in their cars came too late. In one incident, 6-year-old Wilbert Treichel died from exposure to the cold as his parents attempted to carry him through the blizzard to safety. The Buffalo News writes that some of the victims froze to death in their stalled cars. Others were battered to exhaustion as they sought to fight their way to safety and froze to death on roads and in fields. The Daily Mail wrote that Mrs. Peter Bjerken, about 45, and her son Palmer, 8, died from exhaustion near Manhoman, Minnesota, after they started out from their stalled automobile with a husband and another son who made their way to safety. And a companion of Frances Waters, about 21, who perished when she started to walk from their stranded car near Kelso, North Dakota, still was sought today. The Buffalo News reported that Sid Boname, the railroad station agent in Tilden, North Dakota, bundled his wife and small child in blankets while he went for aid after their car slipped from the road. Mrs. Boname and the child were rescued the next day, but Mr. Boname froze to death. Stories were almost legion of men dying to save their families, the Buffalo News wrote. The Grand Forks Herald also lists the Foss family of Beltrami, North Dakota. The mail carrier would find the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Foss and their 14-year-old daughter, Rosalind, huddled together down in the ditch. They had evidently attempted to seek refuge from the blustery winds after abandoning their car. The Omaha Herald reported that 4 boys, Lee, Donald, Dickie, and Robert Taylor of Daisy, North Dakota, left their stalled car. Lost and freezing, Lee, 17, and Donald, 15, buried their twin 10-year-old brothers in a snowdrift, hoping to keep them alive and search for help. The Buffalo News reported that Robert Taylor was rescued, huddled in a snowdrift with his twin brother Dickie, who died just after a search party reached them. It was a feeble wave of the dying Dickie's arms, the news writes, that attracted rescuers to the spot after they'd found the bodies of the two other brothers nearby. Author Larry Scrotch, author of the 1992 book on the blizzard entitled Looking for Candles in the Window, the tragic Red River Valley blizzard of March 15th, 1941, told the Grand Forks Herald, "Growing up, we always heard from our parents that if something happens, don't leave your vehicle. Don't leave your vehicle. We think it's because of the 1941 blizzard that they remember. A lot of people that died in that storm were people that tried to walk off to safety, but the few people who stayed in their cars, they survived that storm." The Omaha Daily Mail reported that in the Fargo, North Dakota Moorhead area, it was believed prompt action of the police and highway authorities averted more serious consequences there by halting highway traffic shortly after the storm broke. The blinding storm made for a terrifying form of tragedy. The Buffalo News notes that in many cases, bodies were found only a short distance from shelter. Prairie Public reported that out near Wing, Emil Dickinson hitched a ride partway home with a neighbor. Living only 2 miles from town, Erickson got out to walk the last mile. The storm came on so suddenly, he lost his way and died, just 200 feet from his farmhouse. The Grand Forks Herald wrote at the time that Mrs. Orland Bailey left her family's car with her ailing husband and children inside to check on another stalled car just 20 feet away, and the furious wind swept her away in the swirling, blinding blizzard. Walking some 3.5 miles in the storm, cold and exhaustion overtook her. She sank down into a 5 or 6 foot space between two small unused buildings on the Minnie Ross farm, almost within a stone's throw of the warm house and safety. Just another 100 yards, and Mrs. Orland Bailey of Hibbing, Minnesota, might be alive today, the article read. The Omaha Herald wrote that Albert Jacobson, 73, a farmer, and his son Albert Jr., 11, were found dead, clinging to a barbed wire fence only a short distance from their home near Fort Ransom, North Dakota. They had attempted to follow the fence to their farmyard. Prairie Public writes that Harry Weiner and his wife made it to the driveway of their farm, but when they got out of the car, the wind swept away the 8-year-old, and her parents ran to catch her. They lost their bearings, but finally came across a fence. Weiner got his wife and children into his sheep barn, but Mrs. Weiner died. The Montreal, Quebec Gazette reported that 57-year-old Saskatchewan farmer Fred Ebel, a father of 8, froze to death while trying to return home after he had driven to the town of Weyburn to get some medicine for his wife. His body was found Sunday morning, a mile from home, the paper wrote. Among the 6 people who died in Canada in the storm were Mrs. John Jansen, 43, and her 6-year-old daughter, found dead in a snowdrift. Some of the deaths were particularly heart-wrenching. Sisters Katie and Florence Howry, 21 and 15 years old, apparently went out in the storm to search for their mother, not knowing that she was safe. The two froze to death along railroad tracks near Pembina. The Omaha World Herald writes that a train ran over them before their bodies were noticed. But in the storm, there were some amazing stories of survival. The Grand Forks Herald writes that H.A. Bond of Edna, Minnesota, survived the blizzard after walking some 3 miles with a group of friends. The car the group of 7 were in went into a ditch in the blinding snow. Wearing only light jackets, they walked through the storm, arms locked. He told the Herald in 2016, "We turned around, 3 in front, 4 behind. We locked arms and walked towards Langdon. It was so bad we couldn't see the ones in front. We would hit their heels when we were walking. It was a bugger. You couldn't see anything. The only thing that really saved us was the blacktop road that we were on. We'd get blown off the road and have to work our way back. The snow was packed in underneath our jackets so tight that we'd stay warm. The group made it safely to a gas station in the town of Langdon." The Buffalo News reported that 1 feat of rescue was performed by a Great Northern Railway crew. The train made an emergency stop when they saw a man waving from a stalled car. In all, the train crew rescued 8 people from stalled vehicles. All those rescued went to hospitals, the paper reports. The Hagerstown, Maryland Daily Mail wrote that 10 passengers on the Northland Greyhound bus stalled east of Petersburg, North Dakota, made their way to a farmhouse, and that 4 University of North Dakota students linked arms to form a human chain and rescued marooned autoists near their fraternity house. They rescued 12 persons. The Dickinson, North Dakota Press wrote in 2018 that the Ides of March blizzard, March 15th to 17th, 1941, was among the worst in Red River Valley history and among the most disastrous ever nationwide. In all, 151 people were killed by the storm.
Prior to the storm, weather forecasters in North Dakota and Minnesota were under the control of the Chicago Weather Office, and the Alabama Weather blog notes that critics rightfully claim that the Chicago office was more interested in local conditions than they were about conditions in the places that were affected by the storm. After the storm, those local forecasters were given more autonomy, and combined with improved weather forecasting techniques, today it is much less likely that people can be so blindsided by such a storm. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you have to do is subscribe.